Hello and welcome to another edition of Bible Time. I'm excited about what we're going to be looking at today because we're starting a new book of the Bible. Today we start looking at the book of Esther. Probably a very much overlooked book of the Bible, commonly misunderstood book of the Bible. It takes place in ancient Persia, about 480 years before Christ. In fact, if you've been with us through Ezra and Nehemiah, these events took place probably right in between chapters 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra. And this book is a bit of a controversial book because there's no references, no explicit references to God anywhere in the book. And it's nowhere quoted or even alluded to in the New Testament. And so people wonder, does this really belong in our Bible? But it definitely does, because what this book does is it highlights an important doctrine known as the providence of God. It's God superintending over events so that his purposes are fulfilled. And this shows not only God's providence in supervising all the events that are taking place on the planet, but it shows God's faithfulness. He is keeping his covenant here with Abraham. Remember, he told Abraham that through him all the nations of the world would be blessed. Well, here the people got taken away to captivity. They're there in Persia, which has succeeded the Babylonians. And it says here near the end of the book, in chapter 8, verse 17, it says, "And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them." That's not just that they're calling themselves Jews. No, they're becoming Jews. They're becoming followers of Israel's God. And so here is God bringing blessing to the nations through his people and through his providential actions that we're going to see highlighted in this book. And so you're going to see how the Lord reached a lot of people with the truth through the events of this book. And it's showing that God doesn't forget his people. Yeah, they're off there in captivity, but they are not forgotten. In fact, as you'll see as we go through the book, he saves them from annihilation, which is always Satan's plan. Satan's plan has always been to eliminate God's people, to eliminate the line of the Messiah any way and every way that he can. And there's a plot that comes up here to kill all the Jews, and that gets thwarted. This is God remembering his people. And so you could really say, although he's not named in the book, God is clearly the main character in this book. Now, the first two chapters, I hope you read them already. We're not going to go through them in any detail, but they lay the groundwork for the rest of the book. They introduce Esther and Mordecai, who is, Esther is the daughter of Mordecai's uncle. And so Mordecai is taking care of Esther, and it introduces them, and it sets up the rest of the book. In chapter 1, we read about the queen, Ahasuerus' queen, Vashti, being removed as the queen, and you can read the whole story there and what that was all about. And it sets up the elevation of Esther in chapter 2 to take her place, to become the queen there. And we're introduced to Mordecai, who we're told is a Benjamite. You're going to want to keep that in mind. He's a Benjamite. And it explains at the end of chapter 2 something that Mordecai did to uncover and expose, blow the whistle on a plot to kill Ahasuerus. And that gets recorded, and that's going to come into play later. So what you see here is all the pieces being put in place. Esther is made the queen, and Mordecai does this act that gets his name recorded in the official books there of Persia. And what you're seeing here, like I said, is God's providence. It's him working for his purposes. It's him working for his glory. And he's also working for the good of his people. This is an incredibly important doctrine, that we believe that God is sovereignly orchestrating all the events of the world, all the billions of decisions that are being made every day by billions of people across this world, and how all of them are fitting into God's master plan. And we're going to see how that works. as we go through this book. And we can trust in God's providence. And if you think about it, you can look back in your own life and see acts of God's providence in your life. In fact, if you have a testimony of God's providence in your life, would you leave it in the comments right below here today? Why don't you share that with everybody? What a great thing on a Thursday to be reminded of God's providence in our lives. Because some of the things that happen on Thursday afternoon, we might wonder if God's really in control and this is really for my good. And so leave an encouraging word if you can, testimony of God's providence in your own life. And we're going to see this doctrine develop. This is the major theme of this book, God's providence in working for and through his people. And so stay tuned. We're going to learn a lot as we go through this book of Esther. And I'll see you tomorrow for more Bible time.